The topic of this video is whether or not Trump will actually fire Powell as the chairman of the Federal Reserve. The short answer to that question is that I doubt that he will, but it is a possibility. Powell's four-year term as Fed chairman ends on May 15, 2026. Firing Powell now as the Fed chairman would cause a firestorm in the U.S. equity and bond markets and could be challenged as unlawful in a court filing that could result in a restraining order that allowing Powell to remain in his post until the litigation is finally resolved or the restraining order is removed by a higher court. The statute that created the Federal Reserve in 1913, passed by Congress and signed into law by the President, clearly states that the Fed members can only be removed for cause. A sane president would realize that nothing would result from firing Powell and possibly other Fed members due to a disagreement about monetary policy, which in effect would end the independence of the Federal Reserve. Trump has been firing inspector generals and members of independent boards established by Congress in order to remove obstacles to his authoritarian rule, and there are no obstacles now in Congress to that, and gaining control over the Federal Reserve through removing federal Fed members and installing Trump loyalists in their place would be just another step along that path that he's following now. I doubt that Trump will fire Powell before his term ends, and all the leaks about him studying the possibility are intentional as part of Trump's propaganda campaign that Powell, not Trump, is responsible for what is happening in the stock and bond markets and the currency markets as well. Trump knows that to convince tens of millions in the United States, it is not necessary to make a reasoned, factual analysis in order to successfully shift blame to Powell rather than for Trump to be blamed for what is happening. If he was honest, he would just admit that his policies are solely responsible for the decline in stocks and the value of the U.S. dollar, as well as the rise in intermediate and longer-term interest rates as investors are becoming more concerned about inflation starting to rev up again. But I'm not expecting Trump to admit that his policies will increase inflation and lower economic growth, possibly into a recession. In Trump world, U.S. tariff taxes are paid by foreign countries. He said so many, many times, and his supporters would cheer that claim. Of course, U.S. tariff taxes are paid by the U.S. importer to the U.S. Customs Bureau, and then the importer will increase the price to U.S. consumers who ultimately pay all or almost all of the Republican tariff taxes. So Trump has to blame someone else for what is happening now, and he cannot blame the Democrats in Congress since his servile minions are in control of both the House and the Senate and are allowing him to exercise powers exclusively reserved to Congress in Article 1 of the Constitution without any kind of restraint of any kind. If Trump was honest, he would remind Americans that intermediate and long-term interest rates increased significantly after the Fed cut 50 basis points in September 2024. The 10-year Treasury yield rose almost 1% from mid-September 2024 to December 31, 2024. The yield was at 3.83% on 9/16/24 and at 4.58% on 12/31/24. And that rise was occurring during the period that Fed was cutting the federal funds rate. So interest rates were going up, not down. Ask a Trump supporter if they know that. I doubt that any of them do. Cutting the federal funds rate with inflation rising will not bring mortgage rates down, but will cause them to rise. Short-term rates like Treasury bills, which I own, would quickly adjust down to reflect the Fed rate cut. But that will also result in savers having less discretionary income to save, pay down debt, and or spend with outsourcing at least some of the spending from income rather than incurring more debt. Trump has proven beyond any doubt, reasonable or otherwise, that it is not necessary to be straight with voters in order to acquire and maintain political power in the United States. Lying all the time about almost everything works far better than being truthful in that pursuit. People get bored when they hear facts. That is the historical lesson that can be learned from the Trump era. Lying and repeating lies over and over and over again is a path to political power in the United States. It is only necessary to attach labels to anyone presenting facts to counter Trump's Orwellian narratives and reality creations. A common label is just to say that the person conveying accurate information is suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, or is a radical left lunatic trying to destroy America, or just claiming that accurate information is fake news spread by the enemies of the people. That is all fascist rhetoric. What is totally absent from those Trump claims that are mimicked and parroted by many of his supporters is a reason and fact-based analysis, and instead substituting for a fact-based analysis juvenile name-calling. And that is all that is necessary for those who still view Trump as competent and knowledgeable, mentally stable, and a genius businessman.